The Mushoku Tensei anime is going to skip Volume 7, and I have proof! Hyperbole aside, I do think that the anime is going to skip, or at least heavily abridge, Volume 7 of the light novel. And also, frankly, I think it deserves it. The main reason I think it'll be skipped should be spoiler-free for anime watchers, so I'll discuss that first, after which, with escalating spoilers, I'll discuss both why I think it should be skipped, and then a basic review of Volume 7 and why I don't much care for it. The reason that I think that they will skip Volume 7 is relatively simple. They kind of already have. You remember this epilogue scene? The final chapter for Volume 7 has a very similar scene that serves the same purpose. In fact, the anime scene is effectively a continuation of that scene from the book. That's basically it for what makes me think that it is already being skipped. Beyond that, explaining further about why I think it makes sense to skip it requires going more into what actually happens in Volumes 7 and 8. So consider this the DEFCON 4 spoiler warning for anime onlys. I'll have to discuss the place of Volume 7 in the web novel versus light novel canon, but I can discuss a little more without talking about any events beyond the broadest of strokes. In short, part of why I think that this volume is skippable is that, once again, it kind of already was. Volume 7 is original to the light novel, and is in fact the largest single change from the web novel to the light novel. It's not really a side story like some volumes of SAO are, but the events are mostly self-contained. Furthermore, Volume 8 provides a larger than usual previously on Mushoku Tensei at the start than most volumes, in order to cover the events between the end of Volume 6, where the anime is left off, and where Volume 8 starts. Beyond that, though, the first part of Volume 8 is essentially another episode in the same vein as the somewhat episodic parts of Volume 7. Now we're getting to actual story discussion, so anime onlys who want to remain spoiler-free should tune out now. I'll still try to keep things in relatively broad strokes for now, though, so there will be one more warning before the major spoilers if you do want to stick around. Basically, Volume 7 and the first third or so of Volume 8 cover Rudy going north looking for Zenith, doing basic adventure things, until the arrival of the call to the next major arc of the story. What makes Volume 7 skippable is that, as mentioned previously, the first third of Volume 8 is the same thing. Rudy goes on one more round of adventuring before the plot kicks in and he moves on, which does a good enough job of showing you what he's been doing for the past X amount of time. Personally, I also think that the mini-adventure in Volume 8 is better than the ones he goes on in Volume 7. What's important, though, is that the first part of Volume 8 does a good job of making Volume 7 redundant. We're now at DEFCON 1 for spoilers for Volume 7 and start of Volume 8. Last call. The last reason I think Volume 7 can, and maybe should, be skipped is that it's simply not very good. By far the worst volumes of the LM. The first two-thirds of Volume 7 introduce a potential new love interest who is a very generic tsundere and a very generic rescue romance. Rudy never joins another adventure party, but will tag along with others. The tsundere girl is part of one such party and doesn't like him initially, thinking he's just some runaway noble kid adventuring for fun. But after he saves her party twice and her personally once, she starts to like him. As an aside, the sheer number of near misses while adventuring starts to strain credulity. Everyone Rudius adventures with should have died on every third adventure they go on without him, given how frequently things go wrong and he saves everyone's bacon. There being only one such mishap in Volume 8, and it being on an explicitly more dangerous than usual mission, means that this problem doesn't come up in the web novel, and thus also won't come up in the anime should Volume 7 be skipped or sufficiently shortened. Basically, the first interesting thing that happens in the book is that when two-thirds of the way through, the two get ready to sleep together, Rudy discovers that he can't perform, an ailment that becomes part of his motivation for the next couple of volumes. However, even this is clumsily introduced. Despite being a horny teen, Rudy somehow didn't notice that he wasn't even getting a semi when oogling attractive women in the time between Eris leaving and him trying to have sex again. I don't know. I don't think I'm that much hornier than Rudy, but I think I'd notice how I went a week without getting at least one case of morning wood. I found the tell in the web novel better than the show in Volume 7. Simply having Rudy reveal it retroactively as something he's already dealing with skips over the uncharacteristically ham-fisted way that it was introduced. Show don't tell kind of falls apart when the showing isn't very good. After that, he goes to a professional of the oldest profession, fails again, and as he leaves, blunders into another generic situation, this time a misunderstanding with the tsundere adventure. This neatly ties up all the loose ends since she never shows up in the story again. Things are actually explained to her later by the prostitute, but now she's ashamed instead of angry, so they still never get in touch with each other again. Volume 7 then ends with a side chapter introducing these people, ending with them discussing recruiting some new allies. The Ellen ends with Rudy's name coming up on their list, and this super handsome and mysterious elf recognizing him. Thus, the epilogue scene in the anime is likely the very next thing that happens. Him telling the others that he knows Rudy, and that Rudy is the real deal, and that they should recruit him. Volume 8 starts off with Rudy doing the same things he was doing in Volume 7. Goes through another day on the job, but with a bigger than usual target. Rudy talks some about what he's been through, including his failures with an adventurer and a lady of the night, and the next plot hook shows up. I think that in this case, less was more. I'm sure I'm somewhat biased due to having read the web novel back when there was no Volume 7, but I felt Volume 7 was entirely predictable based on the summary of events that Volume 8 gives. It felt like what Anne Writer would have produced if asked to write a volume between Volumes 6 and 8. The fact that it had to be self-contained just helped to ensure that it was even less interesting. Combine that with the poor handling of Rudy's impotence being discovered, and I think that the anime would be better served by simply doing things the way the web novel did, and telling us about it in retrospect. I even think that the specifics of the next plot hook provide a good way to introduce it, given that it's the reason he doesn't partake in the Queen of Thoughts when she arrives. More important than my opinion on its quality, though, is that the events of Volume 8 make Volume 7 fairly superfluous. The nature of how the plot hooks for the next arc are introduced mean that the only new element introduced in Volume 7 will have to be re-explained there anyway. And the Volume 8 adventure is just a better version of the ones in Volume 7. This all combines to make Volume 7 the most skippable non-side story content, if anything is to be skipped. Combined with my evidence from the start of the video, namely that they've already effectively shown us the Volume 7 epilogue, and I think it's likely that they're planning to skip it. It's also possible that they'll merely accelerate it heavily as well, though. They could probably knock it out in 2 episodes, say. Have the rescue romance bit play out over 1 episode using like the OP montage to cover for the insert adventuring here stuff. Have the reveal of Rudy's affliction as the cliffhanger, and then have the meat in the later third of the volume as episode 2. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, and let me know what you think.